So my story takes place in a little village called Panatasi, and in this little village there lives a farmer, and this farmer has all this land surrounded. His farmhouse is surrounded by green fields, cornfields, and he lives there. The farmer is quite a sour-tempered man. He's not the happiest of souls, and his reason for being so is that he has had many, many sleepless nights. Because each night in the village of Panatasi, the fairies come out onto the fields, and they sing and they dance in their fairy rings, and they play the music, they play the flute and the recorder, and it's heard by all of the villagers. Most of the other villagers are not bothered by it. They take comfort in the sounds. The farmer, however, finds it absolutely annoying, frustrating, so much so that one night he comes running out of his house whilst the fairies are singing and dancing in their song, and he's flailing his arms at them, and he's demanding that they leave his fields because he wants to go to sleep. And in that moment the fairies disappear, and as he starts walking back to his house, they return and they laugh at him, and they continue to sing and dance in their fairy rings. He storms back into his house, slamming the door behind him, and then there's a knock at the door, and it's an old witch, and she comes to him, and she too, like the farmer, does not like the sound of the fairies at night. She too finds them annoying and wants them gone. So she tells this farmer that she knows how to get rid of them if she strikes up a deal with her, so that he does. So the next day, the farmer gives the old witch a day's worth of his cow's milk in exchange for her telling him how to get rid of the fairies. So she advises him that he needs to go and he needs to tear up all the soil in his fields, and they will leave him alone. And he has to do this at the first light. So at the crack of dawn, the farmer gets up and he sets about and he gets in his plough, and up he rips up all the soil, all the green fields, all the cornfields, all the soil's on the top. There's no more as the greenery, but just mud and darkness. He's whistling away as he does it, terribly. And in that whistling away, knowing that he's going to have a quiet night's sleep tonight because the fairies will not be there. So that night he settles down into bed and he sleeps perfectly. He is not awoken and the fairies have not returned. So following that, he has many very sleepful nights, and he's quite content and he's happy, and his grounds are starting to be ready to be regrown. As he's out in the fields one day, planting and sowing fields, he comes across this short man who's dressed in a bright red waistcoat. And this short red man tells him that vengeance is coming for him. And the farmer dismisses this man, but asks him why. And again, the short man repeats, vengeance is coming for you. The farmer recognises that this man is of the fair people because he's so short. The farmer dismisses it, returns to his house, and even though it's in the back of his mind, he lets it go. He sleeps soundly that night, at first thinking the fairies are going to return, and they do not. Several nights pass, and on the third night, the farmer is awoken by this almighty banging sound. He's shaking in his bed, his whole house is shaking, and he is petrified. And he can hear shouting at the top of the voice saying, vengeance is coming for you. The man, in a panic, runs out of his house, and once again he bumps into the short man in red. The short man in red is holding his sword at the farmer, and again tells him, vengeance is coming for you for what you have done. The farmer begs for mercy from the short man, saying he will give back his fields to the fairy people, that they can have double what they had before. He will pull up with their singing and their dancing if only they forgive him. The short man tells him that you've done what you've done, and it's not his decision to make, but that he will go back to the fairy king and tell him what the farmer has said. So that night the farmer goes to bed, and the worry is there once again, where he's not sleeping very well because he's worrying what the king's going to say to him. So the next day the short red man reappears, and he tells the farmer, I've spoken with the king, and the king has agreed to show you mercy. His way of showing you mercy is that you must give up your land to the fairies again. You must allow them to return to sing and dance and play their song each night for the remainder of your days. And also that your generations following will pay for your crime. And the farmer doesn't hesitate, and he makes the deal. He strikes this deal with the short man, and he goes to sleep that night. And the fairies are returning, his grounds are green again, and the flowers are starting to bloom again, and he's happy in the content of knowing that he is going to spend the rest of his life and his family okay. He doesn't sleep though for the rest of those years. His nights are kept awake by the constant song and sound of the fairies in the gardens, but he lets it go, and he learns to live with it, knowing in the back of his mind that the generations following him are going to pay for his errors. Eventually, the old man dies. Generations passed, and the farm is handed down through the family and descendants of the family. Many years later, there's a young boy living in the house, young man. His name is Rick, and he is in love, with a woman named Gwyn. And Gwyn lives across the valley, and he walks every day just to spend a few precious hours with Gwyn. And that's where he's off to. He's walking there now, and the sun is shining, and he just can't wait to spend those few hours with her. They are betrothed to be married, and they've agreed that they're going to get married following the winter, the first flowering of a bud of a flower. So they're all prepared, and all the families are happy for this to take place. They're all looking forward to the engagement and wedding. Christmas Day comes around, and their family are all sat in the house, and Rick and Gwyn are there, and they're huddled together by the fire with all the family, and the house is full of laughter and joy, and everybody is waiting for the start of the spring for the wedding. The tales are told, and they're all sat around listening to the stories, and within that moment they all hear a loud bang, and the house starts shaking. All of a sudden there's nothing but silence in the house, and then there's a knock at the door. They hear someone shouting, "Vengeance will come," and then there's a knock at the door. And again, it's the short man in red, and he's shouting, "Vengeance will come." And they can hear this shouting all the way from the rivers, from afar as well. And none of them know what vengeance is coming to them, because they don't know the story of the farmer. And this short man tells them vengeance will come. And Rick is begging, saying, "What have we done? What have we done to deserve vengeance?" And they will not tell him. They just continue to say vengeance will come. And then an old witch appears at the door, and she tells them the story that they will pay for their sins, and that the woman is going to spend her life empty-hearted and lonely, and she will live a very, very lonely life, constantly searching for the one that she loves. Ridak and Gwyn are very worried by this, and obviously frightened. And now the old witch leaves, and the whole house is just full of silence and anxiety and fear. It was time for Rick to walk Gwyn home. So as they're walking her home, he stops her underneath a starry sky, and he tells her that no matter what happens, we all love each other forever. They both tell each other that they will be together for eternity, and that nothing will ever keep them apart, and that their love will stay strong through all of it, no matter what happens. He kisses Gwyn goodnight, and she goes into her house, and she sleeps. The next morning, Gwyn wakes up, and Rick is nowhere to be found. She goes down to the villages looking for him, in search of him, and nobody has seen Rick since last night. She goes looking to the families, and all the family are searching for him, and yet no one can find him. People in the village just think that Rick has ran away and left Gwyn, and they just dismiss it as that. Eventually months go by, and people just assume he has just ran away. Gwyn doesn't give up hope, and she looks for him every day. She wakes up at the start of dawn, and she walks the highest hill in the valley, and she stands there searching for her love. She does this for many, many years, and as the years pass, she becomes known as the lonely woman in the village, and the odd one She walks past people in the village and people comment on how much she has aged and how sad she looks and the pain is in her eyes. She doesn't have many friends and she's become very lonely, but yet still every day she goes to the top of this valley in the search of Rick. Many, many years continue to go by, and now she's an old woman and she's there at the top of this valley on her own, and she dies lonely and empty, looking still for Rick. Following her death, she is buried in the chapel by a man in the village. That's where they bury her, because this is where she looked every day for Rick. So what happened to Rick that night? That night when Rick left Gwyn, he came across the short red man, and he walked through one of the fairy rings. And when he walked through one of the fairy rings, he found himself in a cave, which then opened up into another world. It was a very beautiful place. It was very bright and colourful. And he didn't understand where he was, and he was explained to him as what had happened and why he was paying for the sins of the farmer. Rick continued to search for Gwyn, and he went through a door. And when he went through the door, he was back in his village of Panatasi. Upon coming back, he immediately ran to Gwyn's house in search of her. And he arrives at the house and Gwyn is no longer there. She hasn't lived there for many, many years. He runs around the village frantically looking for his family or anyone who may know him. So much has changed since Rick last saw the village. There are trees where there weren't trees. There are flowers where there weren't flowers. He arrives at the farmhouse and it looks different. It's crumbled and it's been rebuilt. He knocks at the door and he begs for somebody to help be there, and an old man answers. Rick enters the house frantically telling his story to this old man and how he's looking for his long-loved Gwyn. The old man looks at Rick and he knows him, he knows his story. He tells him of a story that his grandfather told him when he was younger about a man who went missing called Rick and Gwyn. And the old man relays the stories that his grandfather had told him. Rick is absolutely devastated, and the old man reaches out to comfort Rick, and as he touches him, Rick just falls into a mound of ash on the floor in his house. So the old man scoops up the ashes and he takes them to the valleys, to the highest mountain where the chapel once was, where Gwyn has been buried, and he scatters the ashes with Gwyn. And in that moment, Rick is running up a mountain and he finds Gwyn standing there atop of the valley on the hill, waiting for him. And they spend the rest of eternity together.
So when did you learn that story?
Yesterday. I read, it was just a story that called out to me for some reason. I saw it first and then read some other stories and went back to it, and it was just, I thought it was a really nice story. It's my favourite story.
And have you done storytelling before?
No, never.
And what happened when you went back to the ward then?
Yesterday I went back onto my ward after learning that story, and my patients asked me where I'd been, and I said I've been storytelling, and they told me they were bored, and they said tell us a story. So I started telling them that story, and they listened, and they enjoyed it.